They were told the horizon was a mercy, a wall of holy fire keeping the apocalypse at bay. But sometimes the hum of the towers sounds less like a prayer and more like a lock. And the only thing more dangerous than the burning world outside is the truth hidden in the static. Welcome to Dust and Echoes. My name is James Cawley, and every week I bring you a new original story. Stories drawn from that strange place where memory, myth, and the things we try not to name all intersect. If you enjoy what you hear, sharing your favorite episode with a friend and leaving a comment helps this show grow. Tonight's story takes us to Terth, a settlement enclosed by a shimmering barrier known only as the Salt Line, a burning wall of fire protecting the inhabitants from the radioactive world beyond. This is a story about the rusted machinery of faith, the suffocating safety of a cage, and the price of asking a question that has no safe answer. And what happens when a mechanic realizes the system isn't broken, it's working exactly as intended. I call this story The Burn Line. On clear mornings, the blur looked almost like mercy. From the catwalk around Tower 6, the world beyond Terth wavered. It moved in slow, silvery bands. It looked as if the air had been poured too thick. The salt flats melted into the sky. There was no horizon, no edge. Only a bright smear where everything ended. Caleb leaned on the railing. He watched the shimmer breathe. Inside the ring of towers, the town was waking. Clay roofs caught the first light. Smoke lifted from cook fires. The water bell chimed over the square. 3 hollow notes that meant one thing. Line up. Wait. Pray you're not shorted. Outside, nothing. That was what they had always been told. Dead air, burned world, radiation riding the wind. His wrench sat warm in his hand. The tower hummed beneath his boots. Careful, hero, Petey called from the ladder hatch. Keep leaning like that, and the burn will reach up and kiss you. Petey hauled himself onto the catwalk. His face was already beading with sweat despite the morning chill. He was a sturdy thing, all shoulders and grin. It was like someone had made him from spare parts. You joke now, Petey said. He straightened up. We'll see who jokes when you step too close and go up like tallow. Caleb looked down at the blur line. It passed between Tower 6 and 7, 50 paces away. From here it was just a thickening of the air, like heat above a road. They called it the burn line, as if the white crust beneath it mattered as much as the shimmer itself. We used to throw rocks, Caleb said. Petey's smile faltered. Don't. We did. Petey's throat worked. We were kids. Caleb remembered the weight of smooth stones in his palm, the arc of his arm, the way the blur had flared at impact. A flash of light, a crackle like fat in a pan, the acrid bite of ozone in his nose. The priests had caught them once. They dragged them to the temple. They made them watch an exile walk into the blur as punishment. Or had they? The memory had edges missing. Light, heat, screaming. Then nothing. Like a page torn out of a book and replaced with smoke. He forced himself back to the work. The flow gauge on Tower 6's intake pipe quivered. It was at the same mark it had held for as long as he could remember. The needle sat just shy of the red band. It refused to creep higher or drop lower. Last season, he'd replaced the gauge. 2 weeks ago, he'd replaced the whole assembly, from filter to valve. The needle never moved. Hand me the tester, he said. Petey dug in the toolkit. He passed over a battered metal box with a cracked glass window. It had a little needle of its own. Caleb clipped its leads to the tower's power conduit. The needle flicked. Then it steadied. There, he said. Draw is the same. Load hasn't changed in years. But the council keeps saying the towers are straining, that we're one dry season away from collapse. You calling the council liars? Petey asked. He was half joking, half not. I'm saying the numbers don't match the stories. Petey rolled his eyes. Numbers don't keep the burn out. Something does, Caleb said softly. He looked up at the tower's bulk. I'd like to know what. Below them, the first water chant began. A low, repetitive murmur rolled across the square as people queued with their jugs. Petey rested his elbows on the rail and listened. You think too much, he said eventually. You want answers to questions that only get you in trouble. My father told me once, you don't stare at the sun, and you don't stare at the burn line. Either way, you go blind. Your father also tried to fix a live converter with his bare hands, Caleb said. He wasn't a philosopher. Petey snorted. You're not either. You're a mechanic. Same as your old man. Same as his. Towers break, you fix them. We keep Terth breathing. That's enough. Caleb checked the tester again. The hum in the metal under his boots vibrated through his bones. It felt steady, almost lazy, not strained at all. You ever feel it sag? He asked. Like the towers aren't working as hard as they used to? Petey shrugged. Feels like a hum to me. Same hum as yesterday. Same as when we were kids. Even machines get tired, Caleb said. Bearings wear. Coils cook. But these... He slapped the tower's skin lightly. The sound rang dull and solid. They just keep pretending. Petey gave him a sideways look. You sound like Lana when she's grumpy. The world is unfair. The bread is stale. The sky's too bright. His tone shifted. You want to eat tonight, right? You want water? Then don't say things that make priests twitchy. That's half my personality, Caleb said. Tower 6's top-end turbine had been rebuilt twice since he'd come of age. Each time the consulate had held a ceremony. They thanked the temple for its guidance, and the towers for their mercy. Each time, the priests had anointed the metal with holy oil. It smelled suspiciously like recycled lamp fuel. The technical manual his father had hidden under a floorboard told a different story. The book had a soft cover from decades of fingers. It showed diagrams in the old tongue. There were cross-sections of towers with labels that didn't match anything the priests called them. Heat projector, optical grid emitter, ground panel array, do not service while energized. He'd been 12 when he'd first seen the words United States Army printed under the diagrams. They meant nothing then. Old names. Like some forgotten base embossed under a line drawing of a town square that looked almost like Terth, but cleaner. Now standing in the wind on Tower 6, those old diagrams gnawed at him. The blur, the lights, the hum. None of it lined up with the sermons. Below, the chant rose. Blessed be the towers, the people sang. Blessed be the salt. Blessed be the line that burns the world and spares us. Caleb listened. He watched the blur breathe. He felt the tower's ancient heart beat through his boots. And for the first time in his life, the hymn sat wrong in his throat. The ground under the tower was always cooler. When they climbed down to check the base seals, the wind dropped. The hum thickened. It was trapped between concrete footings and the sloping walls of the perimeter trench. Caleb knelt by the junction box and pried it open. He wiped grease onto his already blackened pants. Inside, wires coiled like veins. Some had been replaced with new copper scavenged from dead panels. Others were original. Insulation, gone sticky with age. He traced the heavy feed line. According to the old manual, it should have run out beneath the salt to the ground panel array. Now it ended in a capped stub. What are you doing? Petey asked. He crouched nearby. Caleb looked at the severed lines. I just feel like when I helped my dad as a kid, that I remember wires being here. Petey shrugged. I don't remember anything being there. Maybe the book is wrong. The book was written when the towers were new, Caleb said. We weren't even a rumor. If something changed, someone changed it here. He tapped the capped stub. The metal was cold, no trace of live current. He scraped away grime and rust. He revealed faded paint beneath. Yellow. Once bright. He'd seen that color in the manual too. It marked danger. Beneath the paint, he uncovered stamped letters. GP Main. Offline. Offline, he murmured. He tasted the old tongue. Not burning. Not holy. Just not working. Stop reading to the metal, Petey said. You're creeping me out. Caleb sat back on his heels. Do you remember when the blur sparked? He asked. Not when we were kids. I mean, after. You ever see it do anything since then? Petey frowned. We don't go that close anymore. I have. To do inspections on the couplings, I need to get pretty close. And it's just weird. I remember feeling static as a kid. But now, nothing. Petey sat silently. He picked at a scab on his knuckle. Caleb closed the junction box. He snapped the latch with more force than needed. He'd leave it alone, he told himself, right up until it refused to leave him alone. The blur glitched on a day with no wind. Caleb was halfway up Tower 6. He was pulling himself along the outer rungs with an easy rhythm. He was a man who'd climbed more metal than he'd walked dirt. Then something in the corner of his eye stuttered. He froze. One boot hooked on a rung. Fingers locked on cool steel. The town below sat in its usual tidy ring. Smoke. Mud. Moving dots that were people. The sky above faded from pale at the horizon to hard blue overhead. Between tower gaps, the blur made its usual slow waves. Except there. Between 7 and 8. For a heartbeat, the shimmer thinned. The world beyond sharpened. Caleb squinted. His breath was shallow. The smear became faint. Straight lines and dull colors. A flat strip cutting across the salt. Something tall in the far distance that might have been another tower. Or a pole. The hum under his hands surged. The blur thickened. It swallowed the hint of shapes. The air looked suddenly heavier. The waves faster. Like someone had turned up a hidden dial. Come on, Caleb whispered. Come on, again. Do it again. It didn't. He stayed pressed to the tower for a long minute, heart pounding, eyes burning. There was a taste at the back of his throat, metallic and thin, like the air after a lightning strike. When he finally moved, it was automatic. Up, around, onto the catwalk. His hands knew the path. His mind was already elsewhere, chasing the glimpse he'd caught. He checked the top seals on habit, listened to the turbine, the scrape of its bearings. The way the vibration didn't match the power readings he'd taken that morning. He tightened a bolt he'd already tightened yesterday. Then, because there was no one else on the catwalk and the tower's hum masked small sounds, he took the wrench from his belt. He held it over the rail. It was the old one. Steel. Scarred from years of being beaten against stubborn fittings. It was his father's, before it was his. The handle was worn smooth where 2 sets of fingers had gripped it. He held it there longer than he needed to. His breath slowed. The hum settled into his bones. If you're going to kill me, he murmured to the blur, do it honest. He let go. The wrench fell end over end. It flashed in the light. It passed the level of the maintenance hatch. Then, the midpoint of the tower. It cleared the inner foundation. It crossed the space between tower and blur. Caleb braced for light, for a crack of sound, for the wrench to seize midair and twist into ashes. It vanished into the shimmer. But there was no spark, no flare, no sound but the faint clink when it hit the ground on the far side. He sucked in air that wasn't there. The blur rolled slowly on. He did not climb down the ladder. He slid. Boots hitting rungs too fast, hands half catching. He dropped the last few feet and hit the packed dirt hard enough that his knees screamed. He stumbled. He caught himself on the tower base. He pushed off toward the gap. Petey's voice called from somewhere near the square, but it blurred with everything else. People's faces were only colors on the edge of his vision. The path between Tower 6 and 7 was roped off with old cable, a token barrier that sagged under its own rust. A sign hung crooked from one post. Its paint was half gone. Holy fire burns the faithless. The blur wavered ahead, a slow, watery wall. Up close it had texture he'd never noticed. Layers, like overlapping sheets of glass. The wrench lay on the other side, just past where the air thickened. It glinted dull gray on the white crust. He put one foot over the cable. His heart thudded in his ears, loud enough to drown the hum. The blur's waves seemed to quicken as he approached, as if aware, as if waiting. He stopped with his toes almost at the edge. His mother's voice whispered from old memory. "Don't ever touch it, Cal. It doesn't see the difference between bad men and curious boys." The last time he'd been this close was as a child, rock in hand. He took one more step. The air pushed against him, not hard, but enough to feel in his skin, like walking into the wind. His hair stirred slightly in a breeze that came from nowhere. The light shifted. Colors bent at the edge of his vision. He held out his hand. It trembled. Sweat beaded on his lip. He opened his fingers, palm toward the shimmer, and reached. The blur met his skin with a pins and needles tingle. Not pain, not heat, just resistance, and a faint buzzing sensation, like the tickle when he'd once stood too close to an old static generator in the relay shed as a boy. He pushed. His fingers slid through. On the other side, the air felt cooler, thinner. He flexed his hand. He expected the flesh to split, for bones to flash through boiling skin. Nothing happened. The hum in his ears wasn't the tower. It was his own blood. He took one more shuffling step, forcing his forearm through. Then his shoulder, until the blur pressed along his neck like a vibrating collar. The world he knew smeared at the edge of his left eye. The salt flats beyond sharpened at the edge of his right. The wrench lay 2 steps ahead. Metal. Familiar. Utterly ordinary. He lunged. For a moment, his head passed through the blur. The sound in his skull went silent. Then, he was out. He stumbled, nearly going to his knees. One hand hit the crusted surface with a slap. The salt was rough and cold against his palm. The air tasted different. Clearer. Less stale. Less filtered. It burned in his lungs, but in a way that made his chest feel bigger, not smaller. The hum of the towers dropped behind him, muffled by the blur. He could still hear it, but as an undernote, not the main song. Under his hand, something small and hard pressed against his skin. The wrench. He grabbed it, fingers closing around the worn handle, and jerked upright. He had done it. He had crossed. His heart hammered. His skin remained. His hair did not burst into flame. The world did not end. He turned. From outside, the blur ringed Terth like a wall of living glass. The towers loomed taller. Their tops sprouted devices he'd never seen from inside. Dish-shaped plates, reflective panels, angled rods pointing inward and out. Vents near their peaks expelled steady streams of hot air that shimmered as it fed the blur. At the base of Tower 6, on this side, a panel sat half open, its fasteners rusted but not sealed. A small yellow sign hung skewed across it, more intact than anything inside. Danger. High voltage. Ground grid. Panel 6B. Do not service while energized. His knees wobbled. He stepped closer. The panel door screeched in protest as he pulled it fully open. Inside, conduit and junction blocks lined a metal plate. Heavy cables ran down into the earth. Most were coated in dust. None vibrated with live current. On the inside of the panel door, a plastic envelope was riveted to the metal. Its clear front had turned cloudy, but he could still make out the paper inside. A faded service log. He pried open the envelope and slid the paper out with shaking fingers. The top line read, Project Palace, Site 07, ground grid status. Underneath, dates marched down the page in neat writing. Testing, maintenance, power checks. His eye caught on the last entry, circled twice in red, 12th of March, 2073. External feed offline. Grid safe. Telemetry. Sim continues. He had no idea what 2073 meant. Terth counted years from the fall. Their tally bore no resemblance to the numbers here. But he knew what offline meant. He read the last instruction again. Do not inform subjects. He read it 3 times, each pass digging deeper. Subjects, not citizens, not survivors. Subjects. Something in his chest went cold. He looked down at the ground beneath his boots. The crust here was thicker, whitish over old concrete. In places, erosion had eaten through, revealing metal grates and mesh. This was where the old stories said the ground would kill, where the electrified plates had once turned birds into puffs of ash. It had been dead for at least as long as the ink on the paper had been dry. 2 years. 20? He couldn't tell. But someone had switched it off, and no one had told Terth. He slid the log back into its envelope and shut the panel with a trembling hand. The blur between the towers swayed gently, indifferent. He walked farther out, wrench dangling at his side. Each step away from the wall felt like a sin. His back prickled as if the burn might reach out belatedly, drag him backwards to punish his courage. The salt flats stretched in every direction, white and gray and faintly rippled like the skin of an enormous beast. Bone fragments lay scattered, stripped, clean, weathered. Some were long and curved, probably from animals. Others were shorter, with joint ends that looked too much like his own. So the ground used to kill. Once. That was how you made a good lie. Start with the truth. Freeze it. Never admit that anything has changed. He walked until the towers behind him were small enough that he could almost pretend they belonged to someone else. A rectangle of metal jutted from the salt ahead, half buried. It might once have been a sign, but the wind had eaten its paint. He brushed crust away with his sleeve. Radioactive zone. Keep out. U.S. Army. Project Palace. Authorized personnel only. The old tongue filed new edges into his understanding, like the words on the diagrams. Project Palace. Like the log. Keep out. He laughed then, a short cracked sound that hurt his throat. Someone had gone to all this trouble. Towers, grids, signs, blur. To keep the outside from coming in, and to keep the inside from going out. Then they'd left the machine running and walked away. Or maybe they still watched from somewhere. Maybe that was what telemetry sim meant. The towers pretending to pulse so some forgotten station's dead-eyed boards could blink and whisper. Everything normal. Experiment ongoing. No need to look closer. Caleb turned back toward Terth. From here, behind the wavering curtain, his world looked small, fragile, sealed in a jar. The hum wrapped the town like a lullaby made from mosquitoes. They thought they were the last people alive. They were the last people who didn't know they were in a cage. He stood there in the thin, clean air, the truth pressing down on him from the blank sky. Then he stepped back through the blur, into the hum and the heat, and the lie he'd been born in. He did it because he still had someone to tell. Telling Petey felt like loosening the wrong bolt. He didn't do it that night. That night, he lay awake on his pallet, staring at the cracked plaster above him, listening to his mother's breathing and the drip of the cistern pipe in the hall. He thought of the log in the panel, and the bones outside, and the sign that said, "Keep out." He thought of the word subjects. In the morning, he did his rounds with hands that trembled if he looked at them too long. He tightened clamps. He pretended he didn't feel the blur, brushing his thoughts like static whenever he glanced at it. By midday, the secret had grown so large inside him that he could barely walk straight. He found Petey at the workshop table behind the tower yard. He was polishing a set of reconditioned valves with more force than needed. Metal shavings glittered around his fingers. "Got a minute?" Caleb asked. Petey glanced up. "You look like you swallowed a rat." "Just come," Caleb said. "Please." Petey sighed. He set the valve down. He wiped his hands on a rag. "If this is about you giving Lana half your ration again, it's about the line." Petey's eyes flicked instinctively toward the nearest gap. Even through the yard's slatted fence, the blur was visible. A pale, constant shimmer. "Don't say that out loud," he muttered. Caleb led him along the maintenance path, away from the square. away from ears. They walked in silence until they reached the underside of Tower 6. Caleb knelt at the base and popped open the panel on the inside. Just the familiar junction box. Petey crouched beside him. This is what is so important? The same old empty junction box again? Caleb swallowed. Not this one. He stood, drew breath, and ducked under the boundary cable. Petey grabbed his sleeve. Caleb! Trust me, Caleb said. Trust you to do what? Get us both exiled? Exile doesn't do what they say. Petey's grip tightened. How would you know? Caleb met his eyes. Because I've been out. The words hung between them like a dropped tool that hadn't hit yet. Petey's fingers slowly uncurled. No, he said. Yes. You'd be Ash. I'm not. That doesn't prove anything. Caleb turned and walked toward the blur. Don't, Petey whispered. He stepped through. Again, the pins and needles shiver. Again, the brief silence in his skull. He turned and held out his hand toward Petey. From this side, Petey's face was a soft, watery smear. But he saw enough to know his friend looked terrified. Come, Caleb said. His voice sounded strange, muffled by the blur. Just your hand. Feel it. Petey shook his head. Caleb pushed his arm farther through, all the way to the elbow. Look at me, he said. No burning. No screaming. Petey stared, chest heaving. He stepped up to the edge, stopping where the dust darkened under the blur's shadow. His own hand shook as he lifted it. Palm out. For a second he hovered there, tendons standing out in his wrist. Then he plunged his hand forward. Their fingers met and clasped. The blur tingled against their joined grips. Petey flinched, but he didn't yank back. Caleb squeezed hard. Feel that? He asked. Feels like static, Petey whispered. Like when we used to rub wool on copper plates. Not holy fire? Petey swallowed audibly. No. Come through. No. Caleb exhaled. Then look. He tugged Petey's arm gently. He turned them so his friend could see past the tower ring. The flat stretched out, white and broken bone, pale. The sign jutted from the crust. Yellow triangle bright, even through the shimmer. See that? Caleb asked. Petey squinted. There's something. A post? Come, Caleb said again. Just one step. Petey jerked backward as if hit. His hand tore from Caleb's. He stumbled, landed hard on his backside inside the boundary. Petey scuttled away on hands and heels, eyes wide. Caleb knelt by the panel on the outer side and hauled it open. The metal shrieked. He yanked the log from its cloudy envelope and shoved it toward the blur. Read this, he said. Cautiously, Petey stepped to the edge of the blur, and his hand emerged to take the paper back through. Caleb watched his blurred form try to make out the text. Petey stared at the paper. The old tongue was clumsy on his lips. But under Caleb's prompting, he sounded it out. Project Palace, he muttered. Site 7. Ground grid status. His finger traced the lines. Power checks. Tests. Grid energized. He reached the last entry. External. Feed. Offline. Grid safe. Telemetry sim continues. Do not inform subjects. He stopped after subjects, lips pale. That word, Caleb said softly. That's us. Petey didn't answer. 2 years ago, Caleb said. Maybe more. The ground stopped killing. The towers still hum because they want whoever's listening to think nothing changed. But it did. We could have left. Left to what? Petey snapped. His voice cracked. White nothing and old bones? Signs that say keep out? They wrote radioactive on those posts, Caleb. Do you even know what that is? It means the burned world. Their version of it, Caleb said. The old manual uses the same symbol the priest draws when he talks about invisible fire, but the manual calls it danger for technicians, not God's punishment. You sound just like him, Petey hissed. The last exile. The one who preached in the square. The towers are lies. The priests are liars. The burn is just heat. They hanged him from the temple roof. I watched his feet kick. Caleb swallowed bile. He'd been 16 then. The man's face had turned purple red. The priests had called it righteous. What if he was right? He asked. Petey laughed once, ugly. Then he died for nothing. Same as you will if you keep talking. Caleb stepped back toward the blur. I won't die, he said. Not if I can get people to see. If we know the fire's gone, they can't scare us with it. You think the consulate needs the burn to scare us? Petey said. They've got the black book. They've got ropes and hooks in the temple cells. They don't need miracles. They need bodies. They need belief, Caleb said. You saw the log. They're the only ones who ever read things like that. They kept it from us. They decided we were safer penned in like cattle than out here where we might ask questions. You sound like a heretic, Petey whispered. Maybe I am. Caleb stepped back through the blur. The tingle washed over him. Then he was inside again, sweat cooling on his skin. He caught Petey's shoulder. You've always said I think too much. Fine. But I think, with the same brain that keeps these towers from falling over, if I can see this, someone on the council has seen it too. They chose to keep quiet. Petey looked back toward the town. The temple's thin spire rose above the roofs like a finger pointing at heaven. Its bell had not yet rung for evening, but the faint clatter of preparation drifted toward them. What do you want to do? He asked dully. Not run away, Caleb said. Not yet. I want to cut the lies at their root. Show the people. Show the temple. Tell them, you're not protecting us. You're keeping us. And the burn is dead. That will get you killed, Petey said. Then let it, Caleb said. But if I die and the truth is out, maybe someone else steps out one day and doesn't come back. Not because they burned, because they found something better. Better than water, Petey said. Better than a roof. Better than knowing where the next meal comes from. Better than living in a story someone else wrote, Caleb said. Petey's face twisted. You think too much, he said again. There was no fondness in it this time. Caleb released his shoulder. I came to you because you're my friend, he said. Because you've seen more of me than anyone. If I'm crazy, tell me. If this is blasphemy, name it. But don't pretend you didn't stick your hand into the line and feel nothing. Don't tell me you didn't read that log. Petey stared at the blur, his right hand flexed, as if remembering the tingle. Give me time, he said. We don't have time, Caleb said. 2 years. Maybe more. Every day we don't move is another day they win. Give me time, Petey repeated. One night. Let me think. If you want to go shout this at the temple tomorrow, I won't stop you. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. One night, he said, and walked back toward Terth. He did not look back to see how long Petey stood there at the edge, staring at the blur and weighing fear against friendship. He would learn soon enough. They woke him in the dark. Hands grabbed his ankles and wrists, rough and fast. A cloth went over his face. He tried to shout, but someone's forearm pressed his mouth, grinding his teeth into his lip. Iron tasted suddenly hot and salt. He kicked, fought, felt elbows and boots slam into his ribs and legs in return. A rope cinched around his wrists, his ankles. The cot beneath him tipped, then slammed back. His mother screamed once before a blow cut her sound off. Stop! Someone grunted. You'll bring the whole block. The voice was familiar. Petey? Caleb gasped around the cloth as they lifted him. No answer. Boots thudded. Door hinges screamed. The cool night air hit his bare arms. They hauled him through the sleeping town like a carcass. He saw only flashes. A sliver of stars above roofs. A child's pale, frightened face peering from behind a curtain. The temple's spire stabbing the sky. They dropped him on stone. The cloth came off his face. He blinked under the sudden glare of lanterns. He lay in the temple's lower hall, wrists bound behind him, ankles lashed. The floor was cold under his cheek. The air smelled of incense and old sweat. The high priest stood above him, staff in hand. His white hair was slicked back, skull gleaming in the lamplight. The consul was there too, his broad body filling too much space. Sash of office tied tight around his middle. Behind them, flanked by 2 temple guards, stood Petey. His friend's face was gray. "Caleb," the priest said, drawing out the name. "Son of Garrett, mechanic of Tower 6. You stand accused of trespass beyond the holy perimeter and of heresy against the burn line." Caleb tried to push himself up, a guard's boot pressed between his shoulder blades. "The line is not holy. It's a device. It failed, and you've kept it from us." A mumble rustled through the shadows. Temple attendants, lesser priests, curious night watchers. They had an audience. The high priest's mouth thinned. "So you admit it," he said. "You crossed." "I walked," Caleb said. "Same as I walked this floor, I did not burn. The burn has been gone for years." "Blasphemy," one of the lesser priests spat. "Tell them," Caleb said, lifting his head to find Petey's eyes. Petey flinched as if struck. The guards on either side of him shifted, hands tight on their batons. The high priest turned. "Apprentice Peter," he said. Caleb's stomach dropped. When had that happened? "You came to us with concerns. Tell us what you saw." Petey's tongue darted over his lips. He stared somewhere over Caleb's head, not quite meeting his gaze. "I saw Caleb step too close to the line," he said. "I saw him reach through the blur. I saw him disappear." He sucked in air. He came back wrong, saying it was dead, saying we should all leave. "You liar," Caleb breathed. It came out soft, shocked. Petey's eyes flicked down. For a shard of a second, something raw and desperate showed there. "I did what I had to," he whispered. Only Caleb heard. The consul cleared his throat. "You understand, Caleb," he said, with the heavy patience of someone explaining math to a child, "that the line is what keeps us from annihilation. Questioning it is questioning the very basis of Terth." "It's not a basis," Caleb said. "It's a wall. The ground panels went dead. The log says so. Project Palace." He choked as a guard yanked his head back by the hair. "The old tongues are for the temple," the high priest snarled. "Not for gutter mechanics." Caleb laughed, a broken sound. "The old tongues are for whoever can read," he said. "You just hid the books." The priest's staff cracked down across his ribs. Pain flared white. He clenched his teeth on a shout. "This is what curiosity does," the priest said to the room, voice ringing. "It gnaws the foundations. It whispers that safety is a lie. It leads men to the edge of the world and throws them in." He raised his staff. "By authority of the consulate and the temple, we find you guilty. Sentence, hanging at first light in the square, that all may see what becomes of those who mock the burn line." Someone cheered. Someone sobbed. In the jumble of noise, Caleb heard Petey make a short, wounded sound, like a dog stepping on a shard. They dragged him away before he could speak again. The cell beneath the temple smelled of mildew and iron. They nailed his wrist to a chain ring in the wall, high enough that he had to half stand, half hang. His toes could just brush the floor. Every muscle burned. In the dark, time lost meaning. He counted breaths until he lost track. He dozed in snatches, jerked awake by his own weight pulling at his shoulders. In one of those snatches, he dreamed of the blur thinning, of Tower 6's panel yawning open like a mouth, of numbers marching across a log. He woke to the sound of the temple's upper bell, not the light chime of water, but the heavy toll of judgment, footsteps, the rattle of keys, the cell door scraping open. "On your feet," a guard grunted. "I never left them," Caleb croaked. They unhooked the chain. His arms dropped, dead weight at his sides. Pain roared through him. He stumbled, almost fell. Rough hands jerked him upright. They looped a rope around his wrists and marched him up into the burning light of morning. The square was already packed. People stood shoulder to shoulder, filling every open space. Children perched on roofs and walls. The gallows. An old beam and crossbar near the temple steps cast a thin shadow across the stone. They'd used it twice in his lifetime. Once for the man who'd tried to steal from the cistern. Once for the preacher who'd shouted about lies. Now they'd use it for him. They pushed him up the steps. The rope around his wrists was passed through a pulley and tied off to a hook. He stood on the little block in the center of the platform, bare feet skidding on worn wood. The high priest stepped forward. Arms raised. "Behold," he cried, "the fate of those who spit on the burn line." The crowd murmured, faces blurred. Caleb picked out a few landmarks in the sea. Lana, eyes huge, clinging to her mother's skirt, his own mother, pale and tight-mouthed, held back by two neighbors as she strained forward. Petey, standing with the temple runners, face a flat mask. Caleb met his friend's eyes. Petey's jaw clenched. He looked away. The rope slid over Caleb's head, the noose scratching the back of his neck, then tightening around his throat. He knew how quickly the drop could do its work, snapping the neck. He also knew what happened when the rope was the wrong length. The priest raised his staff for the blessing. Caleb didn't listen to the words. He watched the blur instead. From here, the towers framed it like teeth around a throat. The hum crawled up through the platform. He thought of the panel and the log and the words, "Do not inform subjects." Fear, he realized, was a kind of current, too. They'd been using it to power Terth longer than any turbine. He didn't want to die as its fuel. He shifted his feet on the block. He was a mechanic. Ropes and pulleys were just machines. The executioner stood near the lever that would flip the block out from under his boots. He was a temple guard, with arms like tree trunks. The rope leading from the pulley to the wall hook passed within arm's reach of Caleb's hands. As the priest intoned the final words, Caleb took a breath against the constriction in his throat. He twisted, throwing his weight sideways, at the same time yanking hard with his bound hands on the rope. The sudden force jerked the line off the hook. The knot holding it there had been hastily tied. It slipped free with a snap. The noose cut into his neck as it took his full weight for a heartbeat. Pain exploded in his head. Then, the rope slackened, and he dropped onto the platform, legs buckling. Everything went chaos at once. The priest shouted. The executioner swore. The crowd screamed. Guards lunged. Caleb rolled, gasping, the noose still around his neck, but the line trailing loose behind him, like a dead snake. He kicked, elbowed, used every dirty trick he'd learned as a boy in back alley fights. A baton caught his ribs. His vision flashed white. A boot stomped inches from his hand. He wormed free, slid under someone's legs. He hit the steps running. Down. Off the platform through the front rank of shocked onlookers. The crowd parted and then closed behind him. A living wave. Someone grabbed his arm. He tore free. Someone else went down in front of him. He vaulted them. He heard his name roared in fury. Heard Lana sobbing his name too. Heard his mother scream once. High and thin. He didn't look back. He ran for the only edge that mattered. The blur filled his vision, waver thickening with each stride. The towers hummed like struck bells. Guards shouted behind him. The whistle of a sling stone passed his ear. A baton whistled close enough that he felt the wind of it. He hit the boundary cable at full tilt, leaped it, and flung himself at the line. If it chose that moment to wake and burn, so be it. The blur grabbed him with 1,000 tiny teeth. Air turned to vibrating glass. For a breath, he thought, this is it. They were right. Then he broke through. The world slammed silent. He stumbled, fell to his knees on the salt. The air knifed his lungs. His heart pounded hard enough to bruise bone. But his flesh remained. Behind him, the blur wall shivered, turning the pursuing guards into stretched shadows. He pushed himself up on shaking arms. The rope's noose still hung around his neck. He pulled it off and dropped it at his feet. Then he turned and walked into the flats. He walked until Terth became a bruise on the horizon. Even the hum of the towers was gone. He walked until the salt picked at his cracked heels. His lips split and bled. The sun climbed and dropped and climbed again. The sky turned from white to orange to black. Stars he'd never seen from inside the blur crowded overhead like a spilled handful of bright bones. He found an old road, a raised strip of cracked asphalt cutting across the flats like a scar. The edges flaked away in places. Faded white lines ghosted its surface. He followed it. It had been built to connect somewhere to somewhere. It still remembered the way. Sometimes in the distance he thought he saw shapes, tall poles with dangling wires, squat lumps that might have been ruined buildings, the suggestion of movement that could have been wind over debris, or something larger. Mostly he saw white and gray in his own shadow. His mind frayed. He saw Petey walking beside him in some stretches, silent and disapproving. He saw his mother on the other side, carrying a jug with no bottom. He saw the towers wrenched from the salt, walking off on metal legs like escaped gods. On the second day, his legs gave out. He knelt in the middle of the road and laughed, a dry barking noise that hurt his chest. Wind scraped grit over the pavement. His shadow lay long in front of him, thin as a stretched wire. "Fine," he rasped to the empty sky. "You built the cage. You broke the grid. You let us rot. You win." The sky did not answer. Something else did. A buzz at the edge of hearing, like a distant insect. Then another. Then a new sound, a low growl, steady, mechanical. He lifted his head. On the horizon, dust plumed. The thing that rolled toward him was not like any cart or wagon he'd seen in old drawings. It was larger than a tower's base, with huge rubber wheels and a metal body painted a dull, official green. It had a square front with dark glass like dead eyes, stubby protrusions along its sides. It roared closer, engine snarling. It slowed before reaching him, then stopped with a hiss of brakes. For a moment, nothing happened. The vehicle idled, breathing exhaust into the air. Then a door opened with a sharp metallic thunk. A man climbed down. He wore clothing Caleb had never seen outside faded diagrams. Patterned uniform in shades of muted brown and gray. Heavy boots, a vest with pockets. A helmet shadowed his face. But Caleb saw skin that wasn't cracked from the same ration air. Eyes that hadn't lived under blur light. The man raised a device to his mouth and spoke into it. The words were English, but slantwise, accelerated, full of clipped jargon. "Base, this is Patrol Delta at marker 41. I've got a live subject on the old highway. Male, late 20s maybe. Clothing's primitive. Looks like one of the Palace boys wandered off script. Static." Then a voice replied from the device, crackling but clear. "Say again, Delta. You have a what?" "Subject," the man said. He glanced at Caleb, eyes flicking over the torn tunic. The rope burns on his neck. He's not dead, not glowing, just lost. Silence, punctuated by soft crackle. Then, confirm location relative to Palace perimeter. "Approximately 80 miles east," the man said. "Well outside grid, no sign of other movement." Another voice cut in, colder. "Delta, stand by for directive." The soldier lowered the device. His gaze met Caleb's. Up close, his eyes were tired. Human. Caleb clutched at that like the last rung on a ladder. "Please," he croaked. "I'm Caleb, from Terth. From your project, the towers, Palace. They think the world burned. They—" "Slow down," the man said. His voice was gentler than his uniform. "You speak English?" He shook his head, as if answering himself. "Of course you do." They ceded the language. He looked over his shoulder at the truck, then back at Caleb. His mouth tightened. "Listen," he said quietly. "You shouldn't be out here." "I shouldn't be in there," Caleb said. "None of us should." The grid died. You left us. I saw your logs. A flicker of something. It's not my call, he said. I'm just a patrol. The device crackled in his hand. The cold voice returned. Delta, this is command. Palace site is still classified black. Any breach of subject perimeter is to be treated as a containment failure. You are authorized to neutralize the threat and sanitize the incident. Copy? The man's jaw clenched. Command, this is an unarmed civilian, he said. He's dehydrated, possibly delirious. We could bring him in, debrief, maybe? Negative, the voice snapped. You will not compromise a 70-year study for a bleeding heart exception. Spiral on this goes way above your pay grade. Terminate the subject. File standard report. This conversation never happened. Understood? The man's shoulders sagged imperceptibly. Caleb watched his fingers tighten around the device. He watched a muscle jump in his cheek. Understood, the man said. His voice had gone flat. He clipped the device to his vest. What did they say? Caleb whispered. He already knew. The man didn't answer. He reached to his belt, unholstered something black and compact, and held it low by his thigh. Caleb had seen drawings of guns. In temple cautionary scrolls, they were always in the hands of demons. Please, Caleb said. The word felt small, worn. You can't keep them there. They drink your lies with their water. The priests think the towers are divine. The council thinks they're doing the right thing. They'll never leave if they don't know there's somewhere to go. The man's eyes were damp. I'm sorry, he said. Help us, Caleb said. Help someone. Tell your command. Tell whoever builds roads now. Project Palace isn't an experiment anymore. It's a prison. The man's hand trembled. The gun's barrel wavered, then steadied. Kid, he said, they built the prison. They kept feeding it. You think they don't know? Caleb swallowed, his vision blurred at the edges, not from tears, but from the way the sun hit the salt. Then why? He asked. It came out between breaths. Why keep it going? The man looked past him, toward the invisible distant ring where Terth still hummed under its glass dome. His gaze was far away, seeing things Caleb would never see. Because it's useful, he said, to know what people do in cages. Static hissed softly from the truck's radio. Caleb thought of the blur, of Petey's hand in his, of Lana's wide eyes, of his mother's breath in the dark, of Tower 6's hum, of the words, do not inform subjects, of his own voice shouting at a wall that couldn't hear him. He had broken the story inside Terth in the only way he knew how, by stepping out of it. Now he understood. There were bigger stories outside, ones written in older ink, on paper he would never hold. He straightened his back. His legs shook, but he held himself upright. If you do this, he said, it doesn't change the truth. The man's mouth twisted. He raised the gun. For a moment, all Caleb heard was his own breath. The growl of the engine faded. The wind faded. Even the memory of the hum faded. In the quiet, he saw the blur one last time, not as a wall, but as a mirror. He saw himself on the inside, staring out. He saw Petey, one hand resting on Tower 6's rail, reading a log by stolen lamplight. He saw faintly the possibility that someone, someday, would step through and not turn back. The gunshot was a sharp, clean sound. It echoed once off the salt and was gone. In Terth, the towers hummed. The water bell chimed. The temple bells followed. Petey stood on the catwalk of Tower 6. Wind tugged at his hair. The blur wavered before him like a curtain waiting to be drawn. He ran a thumb over the edge of the panel on the outer wall that he'd dared to open the night before, heart pounding as he'd traced unfamiliar letters with his fingertips. He'd copied them onto a scrap of cloth hidden now under his shirt. He'd watched Caleb hang, and watched Caleb run, and watched the blur take him. The high priest had said. He burned in the holy fire. Petey had seen no fire. Only a man disappear into the waves. Now he stood where Caleb had stood. He listened to the hum. Machines could break. Stories could too. He closed the panel gently, as if not to wake the old beast sleeping inside. Then he looked out at the blur. For the first time in his life, he imagined the silence on the other side, not as death, but as a place where the humming finally stopped. He stayed on the catwalk a long time. Eventually, he would climb down, because he still had towers to tend, and a town that believed the world ended at the burn line. For now, he let the doubt rust the edges of his fear. Somewhere far beyond the shimmer, a patrol truck rolled back toward its base, carrying a soldier with a report he would file, and then try very hard to forget. The boards at that base would continue to blink their green lights. Telemetry would whisper the same lie it had whispered for decades. Palace site. Stable. No breach, no action required. In Terth, under a sky they thought belonged only to them, a mechanic had stepped outside the cage. He didn't make it back. But the door he'd found did not close. That was The Burn Line, written and performed by the author, me, James Cawley. It's easy to judge the people of Terth for believing the lie, but belief is comfortable. It offers a perimeter, a purpose, and a definition of safety. Caleb's tragedy wasn't that he died. It's that he died seeing the world exactly as it was, while everyone else slept soundly in the glow of a fabricated mercy. It makes you ask yourself, how much of your own horizon is real, and how much of it is just where you've been told to stop looking? My name is James Cawley, and you're listening to Dust and Echoes. If you like stories like this, stories that peel back the wallpaper of reality to show the gears turning underneath, stories that feel lonely and vast and uncomfortably true, then you're in the right place. I release a new original story in cinematic audiobook format every single week. I'll be waiting for you right here next week with another story. Until next time, remember this. A cage is most effective not when it has iron bars, but when it convinces you that the door is locked for your own protection.